Friends, H.P. Blavatsky affirms that the system of knowledge called Philosophia, or the wisdom of love by Pythagoras, was brought to the West from Indian sanctuaries. She taught that it is the same perennial teaching which the true Raja Yogan of the East would call Gupta Vidya, which was symbolized by the Egyptians as Thoth, the ibis-headed god, and what Plato and Plotinus, the two greatest students of Pythagoras, called noetic work. Identical in essence with the secret teachings of Jesus and of Buddha, it is what the 3rd century Alexandrians called Theosophia, divine wisdom or God knowledge. If we accept this view, then when we undertake a study of Pythagorean geometry, we would understand that we are examining a few veiled fragments left in the wake of one of the greatest adepts of known Western history, who, in a pivotal age of great spiritual luminaries, founded a true mystery school devoted to the service of humanity. Like many bodhisattvic incarnations, the ramifications of his influence is still unfolding today. His teaching on geometry and number as revealing the hidden laws of nature not only pervades every form of modern science, but its sacrosanct qualitative dimensions still nurture the deepest strains of symbolic sacred architecture and art, symbolism, mysticism, metaethics, and metapsychology. Iamblichus was a Syrian philosopher, mystic, mathematician, and initiate, renowned for his almost superhuman purity and holiness of life. Though he lived roughly 700 years after Pythagoras, his Life of Pythagoras is the longest and most detailed biographical account available to us. It is primarily from his text that we draw this account. Iamblichus begins at the sacred omphalos of the oracle at Delphi. Delphi was the most important shrine in all of ancient Greece, and the omphalos was regarded as the metaphorical center of the cosmos. People came from all over Greece for divine guidance and healing, and it was here in the 6th century before the Common Era that the future father of Pythagoras was told that, quote, his wife was new with child and would present him with a son who would surpass all others in beauty and wisdom, and that he would be of the greatest advantage to the human race, unquote. Pythagoras was named in honor of this prophecy, the sacred python being regarded throughout the ancient world as a messenger of divine wisdom and immortality. Even as a youth, Pythagoras possessed a manner, quote, adorned by piety, that was so venerable and his habits so temperate and wholesomely disciplined that he was honored by those who taught him and attracted the attention of all who saw and heard him speak, unquote. For an inimitable quiet marked all his words and actions. A voracious learner, at the age of 18, he began a series of legendary travels in search of deeper teachings. For decades, he traveled from sanctuary to temple, learning everything the greatest sages, hierophants, and learned priests of each region could impart, and was initiated into their deepest mysteries in, quote, no casual or superficial manner, unquote. According to Porphyry, the Egyptians taught him geometry. The Phoenicians taught him numbers, the Chaldeans astronomy, The Magi in Persia taught him the mysteries of light. By the Hebrews, he was instructed in numeric symbology and cosmology. Eusebius and others also mention that Pythagoras was instructed by the Brahmins of India, where he absorbed their most secret teachings regarding astrology and geometry, and was called Pitar Guru, father teacher, by them. At the age of 56, Pythagoras returned to Samos and was recognized by them as being under divine influence. He did establish a school in Samos and fashioned a now famous cave adapted to the practices of his philosophy, where he, quote, unfolded a complete science of the celestial orbs, founding it on arithmetical and geometrical demonstrations, unquote. Finding few Samians willing to undertake the necessary disciplines, he moved to Crotona, called the noblest city in Italy, where he gathered many followers who, by his discourse, were moved not only to philosophical study, but to an amicable communal sharing of their worldly goods and possessions. With the very first public talk he gave, he has said to have attracted 600 followers. Iamblichus relates how Pythagoras profoundly influenced the body politic in Italy and Sicily by inspiring them with a love of liberty, of just laws, and a disdain for all that engendered oppression, partisanship, slavery, and discord. He advised men, women, and children, and his words were embraced in a manner similar to that of an oracle. For by his character and countenance, his temperance, paternal affection, and insight, he so impressed and was celebrated by those whom he addressed. It is said that he could also understand and make himself understood by animals. On one occasion, as he was explaining how birds were divine messengers, an eagle flew down and landed on his arm. He petted it, and the bird flew away. On another occasion, he spoke to a bear and convinced him to cease frightening a town's inhabitants. Not bound to the limitations of time and space as we imagine all are, he was reputed to have given verbal instructions to disciples in 2 distant provinces on the same day at the same hour. Pythagoras not only taught reincarnation and the immortality of the soul, but like the Buddha could recall all of his own past lives, as well as those of others. Iamblichus states that the starting point of Pythagoras' whole system of education was to have his followers recall the lives they had lived before entering the bodies they currently inhabit. And he began his training of others by awakening their memory of an earlier existence. How did he do so? For one, as we see in the Golden Verses and the commentary of Hierocles, he provided them with an overarching philosophical and cosmological perspective, which outlined the aspects and functions of the divine and imperishable principles of nature and the path leading to their realization. Pythagoras also understood the theurgic and magical capacities of voice and sound, besides his own speech, which was said to have had a powerful healing and awakening capacity. He used music, voice and lyre, melodies and rhythms by which he employed a certain, quote-unquote, ineffable quality as a form of psychic healing. He understood how to use mantrams and harmonics as remedies for the, quote, irrational and passional elements of the human psyche, and by which he purified the intellective power of his students from the tumult and the waves of a corporeal nature, unquote. Moreover, Pythagoras could fix his intellect in these sublime symphonies of the world, he alone hearing and understanding the universal harmony and consonance of the spheres and the stars that are moved through them, and which produce a fuller and more intense melody than anything affected by mortal sounds. His intent in instructing and aiding students in this manner was to prepare men and women to enter the path of universal enlightenment, by which he could share, through progressive initiations, the divine philosophia that he embodied. The entrance to the school of Pythagoras, as described by Iamblichus, involved several preparatory stages. To begin with, no one was accepted who had not already studied the quadrivium of arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and music, considered the four divisions of mathematics. Even then, not all who applied were received for admission. Quote, until Pythagoras had made a trial of them and judiciously examined them, unquote. This included a careful observation of the manner in which they associated with their parents and relatives, their unseasonable laughter, their silence, and their speaking when it was not proper, and what their desires were, with whom they associated, and how they conversed, how they used their leisure time, and what were the subjects of their joys and griefs. Vegetarianism and all forms of nonviolence, along with authentic fraternal friendship in all relations, was required, not only with one's peers, but even with so-called enemies, all persons and beings in every kingdom of nature. Pythagoras apparently possessed a depth of discriminative insight which could determine the hidden features and karmic history of individual character via the external features and inclinations of a particular person's bodily frame and motions. When Pythagoras had thus duly examined some one person and determined that they may be fit for the school, he then instructed the community to ignore and neglect that person for 3 years, quote, to test their love of learning and their spite for honors, unquote. After this came a 5-year period of silence, where the aspirant was not allowed to speak when the community was gathered for instruction. This subjugation of the tongue and the cultivation of quiet listening was considered one of the most difficult of victories, and it was during this probationary time that the property of each aspirant was disposed of in common and was committed to the care of those appointed for this purpose. While under such scrutiny, all aspirants were expected to freely choose a series of disciplines intended to produce a, quote, purification of the discursive, thinking, and reasoning energy of the soul, unquote. Among the disciplines were those found in the golden verses themselves, reverence and piety towards all, the honoring of the gods, heroes and sages and parents, forethought and noetic deliberation, daily self-study and self-reformation, patience, contentment, and non-judgmentalism, along with the observance of justice and a sense of the sacred in all words and actions. True self-respect, in alignment with an awakening voice of conscience, was central. Life-binding vows were taken. A noumenal and synthetic understanding of the impersonal and moral and spiritual laws governing all things, what Raghavan Iyer calls, quote, the mathematics of the soul, unquote, was cultivated as foundational. All such studies, along with meditation, were to be undertaken with an extreme enthusiasm and energy that an intemperate nature would not be able to accomplish or endure. For it was only in this manner that the, quote, corporeal passions, which normally have their uncontrolled and fixed abode within us, are removed, wrote Iamblichus, with fire and sword and all the machines of discipline, unquote. Thereby the reasoning power was eventually liberated from such mighty evils, he says, and made mild and benevolent, tranquil, sustained, and elevated, that we may then properly recover the universally beneficent noetic capacities and sublime creativity that is inherent in the soul. Pythagorean theogony undermined and transformed the anthropomorphism dominating the popular conception of the Greek pantheon based upon Homer and Hesiod. Deity and divine law were correlated with qualitative number, archetypal geometry, and sound. These were by no means static symbols, but living, vibrant, spiritual essences pervading all of nature. There were many reasons to suspect that most of what Euclid codified in his 13 books on geometry 100 years after Pythagoras was known and taught by the Pythagoreans. However, it appears that in the century in which Pythagoras taught, it was kept secret or esoteric due to its potency and possibilities for misuse. Sir Thomas Heath called Euclid's Elements the greatest mathematical textbook of all time. And it has been published in more editions and in more countries than even the Bible. In the late 19th century, H.P. Blavatsky affirmed that the Pythagorean viewpoint that geometry is indeed a divine science. The fifth key, she said, in a series of keys to, quote, universal esoteric language and symbology, a language so profoundly suited to expressing the mysteries of nature that from the very beginning of human life in our round and globe, the perfected heavenly men of our race used the language of geometry to pass divine knowledge to their pupils from one generation of wise men to the next. As found in every ancient cosmogony, the circle was the starting point of Pythagorean thought, of both meta-geometry and Euclidean geometry. Ontologically prior to the drawn circle of bounded circumference, transcending both being and non-being, the unknown deity was conceived as a boundless circle with center everywhere and circumference nowhere. Nameless, it was known by many names. The ancient Greeks called it chaos or toagathon, and it was passed over in silence by the Pythagoreans. From HPB, the original Greek conception of chaos is that of the secret wisdom religion. In Hesiod, therefore, chaos is infinite, boundless, endless, and beginningless in duration, and abstraction at the same time as a visible presence. For in its etymological sense, chaos is space, and space is the ever unseen and unknowable deity in our philosophy. Nicomachus was a Neo-Pythagorean philosopher of the first century who was one of the first to assert, in writings still available to us, that the sciences of music and astronomy were both inspired by Pythagoras, who revealed insights into their common mathematical basis and hidden mystical and theurgic properties. He wrote of the Pythagorean monos, meaning the monad or one, as the source of all equality and perfection, associated with the god Apollo, whose name means without differentiation. From the Theology of Arithmetic, the monad is the non-spatial source of all number, holds seminally the principles which are within all numbers, the beginning, middle, and end of all things, without which there is no knowledge of anything whatsoever, since it is a pure light, sun-like and ruling, so that in each of these aspects it resembles God. The monad was also called Proteus by the Pythagoreans, meaning first or primordial. Proteus was a Greek sea god who could foretell the future and who assumed any form he wished. Similarly, the monad, or one, as a factor in all other numbers, was regarding as assuming any form. Famously, the dyad, or duality, was considered evil by the Pythagoreans. This may be due to the fact that it implies opposition, polarity, and potential conflict, the loss or obscuration of underlying unity. But the horizontal diameter line that seemingly divides the monad into two is rich in symbolic meaning in esoteric philosophy. It is the symbol of primordial indestructible matter, called Mula Prakriti in Sanskrit, the homogeneous, unmanifested essence of all levels of substance and form. Called Gaia by the ancient Greeks, a word meaning earth or land, she was the virgin goddess who gave her life to all, Mother Nature as the root origin of all levels of being, spiritual, akashic, mental, astral, or physical. Every circle has an infinite number of diameter lines, and if the dividing line is vertical, HPB points out, we have a 1 and a 0, or a 10, the number of fulfillment, completion, and totality, as we see in the 10 Sephiroth of the Kabbalah and Trans-Himalayan systems. In this secret doctrine, Blavatsky states that it will one day be acknowledged that the ancient mystery schools knew the numerical value of pi, 3.1415, and the decimal system, for the number 10 is the very basis of that once universal tree of knowledge. Geometrically, both the horizontal and the vertical are needed to construct the upright equilateral triangle, the 3-in-1. For the Pythagoreans, the triangle was the first true number and the first perfect space-enclosing geometrical figure associated with logos. It signified right proportion, harmony, knowledge, piety, and friendship. According to HPB, in the oldest Grecian cosmology, the third principle binding matter and spirit into one is Eros. Eros is not the winged Cupid inciting lethal romances and passion with his piercing arrows. This would be a corruption of the idea of love from its pure metaphysical roots. Divine Eros refers to universal love, sympathy, and compassion. It corresponds to the Mahakaruna of Buddhism, the Hindu Kamadeva, and the Tibetan Fohat, the active sacrificial energy binding all life into one life on every descending plane as the laws of nature. In the Greek pantheon, Eros was linked with Venus Aphrodite, divine will, universal beauty, and omnidirectional empathy, enticing all the other gods to emerge from non-being into being. In the secret doctrine, this formless 3-in-1 logos marks the pre-dawn structure of the cosmic mind, called Mahat, the combined luminous wisdom of countless suns, harvested from an infinite series of previous cycles, and holds in potentia all that will emerge in the current cosmic unfoldment. It corresponds with the luminous mysteries of the higher immortal triad of every human being, Atma, Buddhi, Manas. By mystic transmutation, this 3-in-1 essence becomes the tetractys, the 4. Conceptually and geometrically, there are a number of ways of visualizing this passage from 3 to 4, from triangle to tetrad. Often the fourth point is understood as lying outside the triangle, equidistant from each of the 3 points already established, and equal to the length of each side of the original triangle. In this way, the triangle becomes a tetrahedron, the simplest possible space-enclosing 3-dimensional form with 6 edges. One equilateral triangle thereby transmutes into 4 such triangles. In addition, the 6 edges of the tetrahedron plus the center point equal 7, the hebdomadic heart of the music of the spheres. The tetractys, as we read in the golden verses, was that eternal witness by which the Pythagoreans swore their most sacred oaths. At the same time, the 4 vertices of the tetrahedron plus the center point equal 5, corresponding to Hermes, the 5th hierarchy, what the golden verses call the heroes full of goodness and light, that host of enlightened beings from prior periods of evolution, whose dharma it is to descend again into evolution, to awaken the fire of mind within humanity, to guide and instruct civilizations. The tetrahedron is the only one of the five Platonic solids that is self-reciprocating. That is, if you take the center point of each face, an inner tetrahedron is formed, an inner seven, ad infinitum. In addition, the six edges of the tetrahedron correspond to the diagonals of each face of the six-sided cube, or hexahedron, another geometrical symbol of tremendous multi-dimensional symbolic significance. The cube unfolded is the sacrificial cross, a symbol of the trials of initiation and of the descent of spirit into matter, of the soul into voluntary incarnation. A corresponding numeric subdivision of the Pythagorean monochord was also demonstrated to yield the three main nodal points of the diatonic musical scale in Dorian mode. Defined by the ratios between the numbers 1 through 4, each of the seven was seen as corresponding to one of the seven primary gods of the Greek pantheon. In the perennial teaching of emanation, as given in the Secret Doctrine, these seven gods are the root spiritual essences and agents of the divine mind, the seven-stringed lyre of Apollo, which further unfolds everything in the manifested universe. Without the seven dhyanis, wrote HPB, neither the cosmos nor human nature can be properly understood. The golden verses of Pythagoras place central importance on this form of divine knowledge, both metaphysically and practically. From the golden verses, never set thy hand to the work till thou hast first prayed the gods to accomplish what thou art going to begin. When thou hast made this habit familiar to thee, thou wilt know the constitution of the immortal gods and of men, even how far the different beings extend and what contains and binds them together. This sevenfold host is also the archetypal essence of all cyclic time, corresponding to the 7 days of creation found in the Hebrew Bible, the 7 Hindu creations, the 7 globes, rounds, and races of theosophical teaching, as well as the 7 days of the week and the 4 times 7 days of the lunar cycle. When the divine eye is awakened, we are told, all cyclic activity is seen to be governed by the same celestial pattern. So perhaps we begin to see some glimmer of why H.P. Blavatsky wrote, geometrical figures, when closely studied, will yield not only a scientific explanation of the real objective existence of the 7 sons of the divine Sophia, which is this light of the Logos, but show by means of other yet undiscovered keys that with regard to humanity, these 7 sons and their numberless emanations, centers of energy personified, are an absolute necessity. Make away with them, and the mystery of being and mankind will never be unriddled, not even closely approached. Geometrically, the 3-dimensional unfoldment can be continued. A Kabbalistic axiom states, the dodecahedron, the whole of 12 faces, lies concealed within the perfect cube. When the dodecahedron is constructed using the 12 edges of the cube, the sides of the dodecahedron are in the golden or divine ratio to the sides of the cube. An alternative way of visualizing the 4th point of the tetractys is as the monadic center point from which the 2-dimensional triangle has emerged. Defining the location of the circle's diameter line, that center point provides a rotational axis in which the upward pointing triangle is mirrored in a downward pointing triangle. In this way, above is reflected below, a hermetic mode of describing cosmic unfoldment. With the grid provided by the interlaced triangles and their common center point, the seventh, we can precisely locate the archetypal 10 points of the Pythagorean decad. To echo the transitions we saw carried out in 3 dimensions, if we extend the diameter lines from center to each of the 10, we arrive at a 12-fold division of the perimeter circle. The 12 Greek gods of Olympus may be of aid in unraveling what HPB called the 12 great orders of the zodiac and what the Buddhists call the 12 nidanas, the causal sequence by which consciousness becomes blindly captive to and released from samsara, the illusions and delusions of cyclic embodied existence. All of this begins to give us some hint of why the Pythagoreans considered the tetractys to be both 4, 7, and 10, the sum of the first 4 numbers. It symbolized, quote, the completion and perfection of number, unquote, the elements of which all else is composed, called cosmos, ordered universe, or Uranos, heaven, and Pan, the all. It was the all-inclusive archetype, which was believed to underlie every class of phenomena, bridging macrocosm and microcosm. It represented self-conscious awakening to every godlike capacity, an omniscient form of wisdom that bridges heaven and earth, the loving sacrificial descent from one to many and back again, mirroring the logoic breath or song of nature. As Hierocles states in his commentary on the Golden Verses, quote, the tetractys contains and binds together all beginnings whatsoever, the elements, numbers, seasons, ages, societies, and communities. And we close then with this quote from the Golden Verses. Take courage, the race of men is divine. Sacred nature reveals to them the most hidden mysteries. If she impart to thee her secrets, thou wilt easily perform all the things which I have ordained thee, and healing thy soul, thou wilt deliver it from all these evils, from all these afflictions. And when, having divested thyself of thy mortal body, thou arrives in the most pure ether, thou shalt be a god, immortal, incorruptible, and death shall have no more dominion over thee. Thank you all.
Porque na vida a gente quer se conhecer pra